into the cloud. Okay, so we're also streaming live on YouTube. So once again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Odonola Bola Adesope. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope you're having a great weekend. I see people are starting to join us. Welcome, welcome. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Yes, I see a lot more people are joining us now. So good stuff. Welcome. It's good to have you all here this afternoon. So, depending on where you're joining us from, it's afternoon in some places, it's evening in other places. But thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. So while we wait for the rest of the party to join us, I will just I'll just ask us a couple questions. And is for some of us, we just got back to school barely a week ago. So what was the first week of school like for those of us who just got back to school? And for those of us who already started maybe 2-3 weeks back, how has the journey been so far? I want to hear from you. Please use the chat box. Let us hear from you. For us, I think it's safe to say that we got off to a good start. We got off to a great start. So yes, that's the experience on my own end. But I definitely would like to hear from the rest of the party this afternoon. So let's hear it. Please use the chat box, leave an emoji. How was the first week of school for you? How did it go? Were you able to power through? Are you exhausted already? Let's hear it from you. Yes, some people are also just joining. Welcome for those who are just joining. Good afternoon. We were just asking us what it's been like for us in the last 1 week of school for those of us who just got back to school last week, and for those who have been at it for 2-3 weeks already. How has it been so far? We want to hear from you using the chat box. Somebody must have something to say. I'm pretty sure you all have you've had your fair share of waking up earlier than before, maybe. So yeah, so far so good. Yeah, that's something. If you also want to, we made it, yes. We made it. That's good. That's good. It's been okay. Yeah, okay is good. Okay is good. Okay is good. I will just give it like 2 more minutes just because we want to give a bit more time for people to join. But at 3:05 on the dot, we will start earnestly. So for those who are still here or those who are here already, yeah, someone is excited that the kids are back to school. I am excited too, honestly. I am really excited. I got so much work done in the last 3 days than I did cumulatively 2 weeks during the holiday. Like that's how much work I was able to get done. That's not to say they were disturbing me. No, they weren't, but I just had to be more available, more engaged with them during the summer holidays. So yes, feel like I'm just getting my groove on back with work, but it's been good. And they're also very excited to be back to school. That's something. I mean, the excitement also will keep them going. So I wonder where's the rest of the party this afternoon. We have just 1 more minute and we will move on. So I'm going to share my screen as well. Let me know as soon as you can see it. If you see my screen, please give a thumbs up. Thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you for being generous with your thumbs up. So for those who are just joining us, welcome. Good afternoon. We were just asking ourselves how first week of school was for those of us who just got back to school. For those who have been at it, share your thoughts as well. Use an emoji, something. Just put a message in the chat box. What has it been like for you over the last 1 week? We've had some great comments in the last few minutes. So if you want to share, we would appreciate that as well. Leave a comment in the chat box. What's your journey been like in the last 1 week? Okay, it is now 3:05. we are getting started proper. We're getting started proper. So welcome everyone once again. Today we are talking about something really interesting. We're talking about IEP. So, and I'm pretty sure some people are wondering what is IEP. So let's hear it. How many of you are familiar with IEP? Use an emoji again or a thumbs up, basically, yeah. A thumbs up is easier. So how many of you are familiar with IEP? How many even know what IEP means? Okay, good stuff. That's one person. Who else? There's going to be more people familiar with IEP in the room. Okay, good. Thanks, Tochi. So that's two people. Okay, another person says yes, they are familiar with IEP. That's great. So it's good to know that we have at least people who know about IEP, who know what IEP means. Now, with your understanding or with your experience with IEP, now I need us to use an emoji, like for real, use an emoji. How do you feel about IEP? Like, what has for those of you who are currently going through an IEP program or whatnot, let's hear it. Use an emoji. What are your thoughts about it? How do you feel about your experience so far? Just an emoji. You would say that I like emojis, maybe. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Moturayo. That's what it means. But I want us to use an emoji to sort of share what we feel about IEP for those of us who've had some kind of experience with it. What are your thoughts? Is it working? Is it great? Is it just meh? You know, just use an emoji. Let's hear it. What are your thoughts? How do you feel about it? This is me buying time for the rest of the group, in case you're wondering. Okay, somebody's like, confused. Okay, it's okay. That's why we're here to unpack it. Unpack what it means and how you can navigate. Okay, someone else has had a great experience. That's not too bad. That's good. Honestly, as is with every other thing in life, there will definitely be mixed feelings across different people. People will have different experiences. But I'm glad that this is something we're talking about today. We're here to unpack what it means, how you can navigate, how you can really advocate for your kids. That's why we're here today. So if you are in the category of those that are confused, you're in the right place. If your experience has been meh, you're also in the right place. And if your experience has been great, fantastic. It's always great to know more. So whatever group or whatever category you're in, I assure you that you will get a lot of value from the session today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this ride. Now, just before we go deep into what our agenda is for today, I'm just going to be telling us a little bit about who we are. And this is really for those who don't know about the Chronicles of an Autism Mom Foundation. We're a not-for-profit organization and we're dedicated to providing resources, support, and advocacy for individuals with autism and their families so they can feel confident and empowered as they navigate the complex world of autism. Emphasis on the complex world of autism. It is truly complex, but that's why we're here to be able to support you through this as we also walk through the same journey. And our mission is really to support you in navigating, again, the complex world of autism. And we provide resources and helping your child to reach their full potential. Our vision is to create a community where individuals with autism and their families can thrive. So it's a journey. It's not a destination. We're just going to continue to walk through this, but that's why we're here. And that's one of our pillars on which we stand, and that's really what we're about. So today, some of the resources that we have, of course, if you hop on our website, www.coammf.org, there's lots and lots of resources. Our founder, Abiola, also offers free consultation to family. I don't even know how she's able to do it, but she's phenomenal. And she's been taking lots of free consultations, supporting parents and families, helping them, providing, a shoulder for them a lot of times, and it's been great. We also have a blog on the website. We have a WhatsApp group that is now that has metamorphosed into a community, and it's been great. For those of us who are part of the community, we know how supportive the community is. We also have an avenue where we actually support each other through prayers as well. So there's been a lot going on. All of this without any funding by the government, but it's a passion. It's what we love to do, and we're happy to always provide all of this support. We're also on social media. We share lots of resources, lots of tips and all on our social media pages as well on YouTube. Right now, we're streaming live on YouTube. So for those who are unable to join on Zoom, you can also find us on YouTube. And so that means, again, you'll be able to watch this video later. So even if you miss a certain part of it, don't worry. It'll be there on YouTube for you to watch. So that's that about some of the resources that we have. Today, we have someone in our midst, and he's going to show his face in a couple seconds. But just before he does, Ryan Machette is with us today, and I'm really excited. I met with him, we spoke with him, and honestly, I'm excited to hear from him this afternoon. He's the director and co-founder of Imagine Consultations, and Imagine Consultations is an organization that provides support for families, for children and individuals, including person-directed planning and facilitation services. And some of the services that they provide include organizational workshops on the developmental service sector for staff or population served. They also do school board navigation, transition planning, and advocacy. They provide assistance and guidance on how to add value to existing programs. They increase visibility in the community through in-person media tools or virtual means, which again is what he's doing with us here today. Ryan has served in several capacities within school boards, government-funded projects. There's a lot about Ryan. As I said, we met with him, and I am thrilled that there's so much that he's doing in his space. So again, let's give Ryan a warm welcome. If you can clap, because I am clapping. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today, Ryan. The floor is now yours.
It's my pleasure for being here. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, this is it's a fairly complex topic around navigating the school system and in general, and then also with IEPs. And as people sort of get to know the intricacies of the school system and sort of how the individualized education plans work, and how as parents and as caregivers are able to support your loved ones as they're moving through the school system, and then eventually into life as an adult. And so there's these critical stages as you sort of move through your life and through school and through all of these different sort of stages and phases of your life. And so a lot of those pieces are really sort of born out of your experiences within school, and how you're able to create the skills. Perfect. Awesome. So just try to, make sure that you set yourself up for as much success as possible, because those skills that you learn while you're in school, a lot of times they trickle into, what the hope is that they would trickle into your experience as an adult, so that you become successful in whatever pathway you decide to take. So I'm going to share my screen and share, if that's okay, Udu, I'm going to share my screen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. And then just to sort of walk you through a presentation. I know that we have a lot of questions that came up when I first logged in. I think we have several, so we have some time at the end for questions, but I want to get through this part as thoroughly as possible, but also bearing in mind that there's going to be a lot of questions, because it is such a complicated and not often understood process for families that are going through. There is an assumption that whatever's being done at the school is based on years of documented practices, and the programs are structured in a way that are optimizing success and outcomes and those type of things. And unfortunately, the data just isn't quite there. And so it's sort of two parts. So like one is that it's unfortunate that there's not a lot of data to suggest whether or not programs and certain aspects of executing the IEP are successful. That's sort of unfortunate. However, the benefit to a lot of families is that, because there isn't sort of this hard and fast, this is what works, we know best, leave it to us. It gives you a lot of leeway as parents and caregivers and loved ones supporting children in special education supports, or whatever. Because I know there's people sort of logging in from all over, well, the globe, from what I understand, which is great. It might be called something different in your region, but essentially what it is that the individualized education plan is designed to create a customized program that takes a look at the individual's learner profile, their portrait, their who they are as a learner, and then mirroring that with a program that is going to be customized to them in order to then help their success as they move through school, but then also into life as an adult. So it's meant as an intervention. The IEP is really sort of there to provide you with an educational intervention, an academic intervention, in order to then provide you with the skills that you require in the school setting to then be successful, whatever that's going to look like for you. And so there are many different sort of parts to the IEP, and I'm going to kind of go through all of this as well. There's no point in sort of giving you sort of a template of what the IEP looks like, because it could look completely different in whatever region you're in. But these are sort of the best practices so far that I've sort of experienced in my time working in the school board for many years, working in the developmental sector, and also as a job developer for adults with disabilities. So I've been in the field for almost 18 years now. And between my wife and I, through Imagine Consultations, we're a two-person show. We like to consider ourselves a one-stop shop, and that we're barrier free. And between the two of us, we have over 40 years experience working in this field. So we we don't we don't get a lot of downtime. We're constantly sort of, if we're not working, we're talking about work a lot of times. So, but we try to keep it light. So anyway, so this is a presentation that I designed in order to sort of give you some best practices. Not necessarily to say like, do this, do this, do this. It's more about consider this, consider this, consider this, and here's how you can put it into action. So it's really about empowering parents. Parents hold a lot, and caregivers, I should say, hold a lot of power when it comes to ensuring that your child or your loved one is successful in school. And I think that a lot of times parents don't necessarily feel like they have a lot of power. They don't feel like they have a lot of sway when it comes to what's happening for their kid in school. But the purpose of this presentation is to really sort of get you to understand that you do in fact have a lot of sway and a lot of power and a lot of social capital, in order to then go into these meetings at the school and feel confident that you know how to conduct yourself in a way to advocate for change and not feel like you have to revert back to agitate, because there's a vast difference between advocacy and agitation. And so I think that being a strong advocate is really understanding the full scope of what it is that you're asking for and understanding your why. And so that's one of the things I want to emphasize through this whole process. So without further ado, I'll get started with sort of part one. It's my go-to to sort of have everyone kind of recenter and refocus their conversation. It really is about sort of kind of coming back to your baseline, right? And I think that a lot of times when parents are, especially within the autism community, is that you're sort of bounced around between agency to agency, you're bounced around from school to school, you're bounced around from therapist to therapist, you're sort of, and typically it's your first time kind of going through it, so you're sort of leaving it up to the professionals to really feel like they're doing what they need to do. And so you get in this sort of habit of continually going through the paces of, okay, well, now I've got to go do this, and now I've got this report and the summary, and now what do I do with it? I'm assuming that the people that did it have now passed it on to the people that should have it. And so you're sort of you become almost a spectator in your own life, and you sort of watch. That's sort of the feedback I get from a lot of parents, that I feel like I'm just watching my life sort of unfold. I don't feel like I'm an active participant. I feel like I'm just sort of trying my best to get through the day in order to support my child. And so one of the best things that people can do is just continually just sort of regroup and go back to, okay, where am I now? Where am I now in this journey? What do I currently know? What are all the things that I have at my disposal? And you have to work on the assumption that not everyone or very few people know everything that you know. And so a lot of times parents, when they're there's a conflict, like not, I don't mean like an aggressive conflict. I'm just talking about like sort of a light conflict between what the school team knows about the student versus what the parent has been sort of trying to advocate, that their child what they're capable of, is that a lot of times parents don't realize that the school team possibly has never gone through their file and has never reviewed anything from the file. And that's not to say that that's across the board. That is something that just kind of happens sometimes. There are these programs that are sort of prescribed for a general learner, and a lot of times, unfortunately, students with autism, they tend to sort of get put into these programs that are very vague and ambiguous, and there are certain parts that are good for some, and there are certain parts that are good for others, but nothing really sort of individualized. And so as you start to develop this understanding of how best to advocate for your child, or how to advocate for this student who could potentially sort of fall through the cracks, you really get to know where you are now, as far as all the reports and summaries and those type of things. This is a real example of a parent that I was working with. They had gotten all the way through to high school. So I believe the student was probably about 16 or 17. And the parent was really struggling with their advocacy. They didn't really know what to do. They couldn't understand why there was this big disconnect between what the school was trying to do and what she was trying to ask for. And so she kept on saying over and over again, but I've told them, I don't understand. And so we kind of, this was when I was working for the board. So when we kind of came down to it, was like, okay, bring everything that you have, because what you're explaining to us is really hard to kind of conceptualize. So she brought in just file after file after file. It was huge. I mean, there was several like files and documents, and she just thrown every single thing in there, not realizing that when you just sort of throw it in there and don't share it, it's really hard to disseminate amongst the larger group. And so as we kind of sat at this boardroom table and spread out all the different reports and summaries and assessments and anecdotal data and whatever, was that we found that about maybe 70% of the stuff that we had laid on the table, the school team had never seen. And so there was this disconnect between what the parent felt that the school should know versus what the school team actually did know. And this would happen to be a very good school, and they were happy to take all that information and really sort of boil it down to creating an individualized program, but they didn't have a lot of this data. So a lot of times schools and parents and community agencies and all the people that are supporting this child, they have all of this information, but none of it is being consolidated anywhere. It's just sort of out in the ether, and nothing is really sort of being brought together. And if it is being brought together, it's not really being brought together in a way that actually creates a full understanding of a 3D model of the child. And so when that happens, typically is that you end up getting these behaviors, quote unquote, because I mean, I'm not here to define behavior, but I mean, it's you get these sort of communication outbursts from students, and all of a sudden the school's like, well, now we have to treat the behavior. Meanwhile, it's really just a matter of that if we really had a firm understanding of profile and program, we really wouldn't have any of those interfering behaviors creeping up. And so that's a really good way to, like, if we're looking at where to start and you feel overwhelmed and you feel like there's this huge sort of thing looming over top of you, and you're feeling sort of this weight of like, there's so much stuff I don't even know where to start. This is a good place to start. Consolidate everything, meet with your school team, meet with your community agencies, sit down as a transition planning team, and really sort of pour over the data to make sure that everyone has current data and information. Right. And that leads us into part two, which is essentially who's on your team. A lot of times parents take on, and caregivers, they take on this sort of role of I think it's different for everyone. I think that some parents I've talked to, they're extraordinarily well connected in the community. They've got, all these people, and they really sort of have this massive amount of support. But because they're so big, no one really knows what their role or responsibility is within that group. They just sort of kind of exist, but they don't really know where their information is going or who's doing what. And then parents are now sort of in a situation where they have to then become like a social worker and to kind of like quarterback this whole team that they don't really know how it all fits together, and you kind of get like this crash course PhD in how to navigate service coordinator or services and et cetera. And so, that can be overwhelming for parents. And then a lot of times you get that family breakdown, and you get a lot of stress, and all these things sort of come out because you're really just trying to. A lot of times the parents that I work with, they really have a hard time delegating that in or delegating those responsibilities to other people. And that's what I always try to encourage them, is to say, you have to create a transition planning team. And I don't mean transition planning like when the child is like in Ontario, you can stay in school until you're 21 if you're accessing special education supports. It varies even within Canada. But you really need to make sure that that transition planning team is established as early on as possible, because you want to take a look at the student and their academic and life in sort of three major parts, which is school, home, and community. And so you really need to make sure that school, home, and community are all working together in order to determine what everyone's role and responsibilities to then support the student. And so I always like to have one big meeting at the beginning. I know that a lot of people shy away from big meetings. They're like, oh, it's just a cast of thousands meeting, or it's the $1 million meeting, or whatever it is that cynical people like to sort of say. But I'm a big advocate for that. Just one. It doesn't have to be all the time, but one big meeting at the beginning to make introductions. Okay, like I'm so and so, I'm the behavioral therapist. I'm so and so, I'm the occupational therapist. I'm so and so, I'm the speech and language pathologist. I'm so and so, blah blah blah. I'm Ryan Machette. I'm the educational advocate supporting transitions, right? Whatever. Now we know what our role is, but what are our responsibilities? My role, or my responsibility as an educational advocate, is to empower parents in order to become stronger advocates based on knowing what sort of outcomes that they want to achieve, and then create milestones and checkpoints along the way in order to ensure we're on that path. And speech and language pathologists would then go. And then so as we sort of work our way around the table, we now all know what each other does. And so what we can do in that moment is we can identify any of those sort of gaps. So if the child really has a hard time with sensory issues, and they're sitting there, and the parent is really putting a focus on speech and language, and the school team is putting a focus on straight academics and da da da, a clear gap in there would be occupational therapy, right? So, okay, we've identified occupational therapy. Who's making that referral? Is it going to come from the school? Is it going to come from the external partners? Who's going to be doing that? What's the purpose? What do we want to do? We then figure that out as a team to then say, okay, we've identified the gap. We know what we need to do to fill that gap. Who's going to be responsible to do it? When do we meet back? And how are we then going to share that data, right? And so as we kind of determine who's on the team and who's doing what, and how we're going to work together, we also need to figure out how we're going to share that information, and how are we going to sort of make sure that there is that communication protocol that's set in place in order to then determine as information starts to come in or change, or as goals start to be achieved, those type of things. How are we then going to sort of bring all of that information into one place so that everyone now knows what's going on in real time? And if at some point we sort of say, okay, well, there is a bit of an overlap here and here and here, okay, great, but is that an overlap that it needs to be sort of detangled, or is it an overlap that really needs to be sort of re-looked at in order to make sure that we're touching base on the right thing? So that team approach is really helpful, because I find that what ends up happening is that just one more point on that is that, like, a lot of times, I don't know if you can see me or not, but I'm doing making a gesture on my camera. But anyway, if you can't see me, it's kind of like it's the difference between a big spike on a person who's laying down versus like a bed of nails, right? You're always going to have stress. You're always going to have things that need work on. You're always going to be having these sort of things that you feel pressure as a parent or as a caregiver to look after your child. And if you try to do it all on your own, it's like a big spike in the middle of your back, right? But if you spread that amongst your entire team and say, okay, here's all the responsibilities, here is everyone's role, here's how I'm going to relinquish some of that sort of responsibility on these particular areas, and trust the process and trust the professionals, you really sort of spread that out, and it becomes more like a bed of nails where you're not going to get impaled by the stress of trying to do this all on your own. So that's sort of one of the next key things, is really, if you want to make your life a lot easier, you really have to establish a team, and make sure that that team is attending all the meetings, when they can, if it's appropriate for that person to attend, and then make sure that you have a way to share all of that data. Okay. So we've consolidated all of our data. We have a very clear understanding of the learner's profile. We have a really good understanding of the person as a whole, not just as a learner. We've identified key members of our team. We've identified what their responsibilities are and how we're all going to work together. Home, school, community is all taken care of. We've sort of rounded that out. Brilliant. That's great. And just to sort of touch base on the team part too, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be clinicians or professionals. It could just be anyone that's really helping to promote independence. We've had several people attend meetings that traditionally wouldn't be somebody that you would think to bring to a meeting, but we've had a lot of coaches. We've had martial arts instructors attend because they understand structure and task analysis. We've had neighbors, we've had, you name it, anyone that really knows the child, we really want them to come in, because there's a piece of information that everyone holds, and you really want to make sure that you're getting that out, and don't sort of think that person isn't appropriate to attend. If you think they're appropriate, they probably are. So now we're on to sort of this next stage. We've got some good momentum going. Now we need to figure out, what's our vision. Right. I find that that this is one of the pieces that has really helped me professionally reach parents and students and school teams on a much broader level. Ever since I started to sort of structure how it is that we do vision planning. So I attended a workshop years ago, and somebody had sort of articulated what I'd always been trying to do, and she called it the vision statement, and I've sort of just adopted it, and I think that it's a really good way of framing it. And so when you're sitting down as a family and you have these sort of thoughts and hopes and dreams for your child long term, it's really good to start to write those things down. And then sometimes it's really hard to do, as far as, my child's 7, I don't know what they're going to be doing when they're working. I don't know what they're going to be doing when they're 25. I don't know any of those things. It's really hard for me to sit down and write those things out. That's fine. I get that. That's pretty normal. But one of the things that I really like to get parents to really start to do is just think, best case scenario. What would you like to see? What's your blue sky, right? What would you really love to see for your child when they're done the school system, when they're done their formal education? What would you like to see from them? And I sort of boil it down to 6 areas. And that's, it's sort of changed over the years, but what I found is that these 6 areas are the ones that we keep kind of coming back to. And so the number 1 is employment. And it's not number 1, it's like it's the most important. It's just number 1 because it's just how I memorized it over the years when I do presentations. So number 1 is employment, and I'll come back to it. Employment. I also want parents to think about education. I want parents to think about independent living, or just living arrangements, I think, is what we've adopted the term to be because of that. We want to start to think about community engagement. We want to start to think about transportation, and we want to start to think about communication. So those are the 6 areas that we really want to focus on when we're thinking about a vision statement. And there could be others. Feel free to add, subtract, whatever it is that you want to do, whatever you're comfortable to talk about. Because having a conversation with parents whose child is in grade 4 or 5 is really hard to talk about what it's going to be like if they were to live independently or semi-independently. I kind of see parents kind of gloss over, and they stop listening. You can tell they sort of check out of the conversation, because it's like, I really have no interest in talking about this right now, because I can't fathom the idea of them not listening to, or not living with me at that moment. So, you use a bit of kid gloves and common sense when you're talking to people about what it is that they want to be doing for those long-term plans. But again, it's really just sort of focusing on what would be your ideal, right? And so as we kind of walk through, we think about in terms of like employment, for example. It's a good third-party focal point to talk about employment when students are in school. because a lot of times teaching teams get sort of stuck on what the students like in the classroom. And so a lot of times when that happens is like, oh, well, I couldn't possibly send that student out for a work experience because, in the classroom, they're just so dysregulated. And that's not really fair to the student because maybe the classroom is what's dysregulating. Not that they're dysregulated, it's just that the classroom is quite dysregulating for the student. So they might actually be really good in the workplace, but you'd never know that because they've never been outside of the classroom. So one of the things that I really like to do when I feel that we're at a bit of an impasse, or if we're really not sure where to go, and the parents are saying, well, they're like this at home, and the school's saying, well, they're like this at school. If there's that sort of conflict, is that what I like to do is create the perfect job. It's just a little exercise that I do with school teams and parents and students, which I always hope are going to attend the meeting. Sometimes they can't, totally understandable. But we create the perfect job, right? So we sit down and we're like, okay, if we were to create the perfect job for this person, what would it look like? Where would it be? What would they be doing? And it just completely changes the tone of the meeting. It's really just now about, okay, well, what are their strengths? What are their interests? How do we combine the two in order to then create something? Are they creating a product? Are they delivering a service? Are they working for somebody else? Are they working for themselves? What would that look like? And then we start to really sort of go through that. When you start to realize that all these micro skills start to really pop up, right? Like their attention to detail, their ability to stay on a monotonous task for a long time. They can create these beautiful works of art or complete this massive Lego set of 1,000, pages, and they can do it in a weekend, whereas it would drive a lot of people absolutely nuts to sit down and do that for hours on end. Meanwhile, this person, that's what they love to do. You start to really sort of change the scope of the conversation, and all of a sudden now you're like, oh, well, the perfect job would look like X, Y, and Z. I'm like, great. So now we have an endpoint. How would we get there? And then, if it's competitive employment. So in Ontario, we have to make sure that somebody is able to work a minimum of 3 hours because that's the minimum shift. And in order to be considered competitively employable in Ontario, you have to work 20 hours a week. Okay, that's our focus. How are we going to get that? Are they able to do this at that point? How far away are we? And then we sort of build our trajectory from there on our milestones based on getting them to that next level. And then a lot of those academics start to shift as well, because now we realize that if we were to change those numeracy goals to reflect the employment goals that would need to be met in order to be successful, you now start to create your IEP and you start to create your numeracy. And then you start to take a look at your literacy. Okay, well, you need to be able to communicate over email to customers, or you need to be able to read a schedule, or you have to be able to read a recipe if you're going to work in a kitchen, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Now that's our literacy. There is your IEP goal. That's how we're going to sort of create this. And then as we kind of go through that, you really start to find that the IEP starts to sort of tend to write itself. And so you really start to take a look at all the different pieces that would create a perfect program, focusing on something like employment, because the the point of school and the point of going through it all is eventually to get a job, right? I had this conversation with a coworker a long time ago where we were talking about how it was so important that this one student get through to get their credits and to get their high school diploma and then go to college, and it was this big push, and I just kind of was very sort of nonchalant about the whole thing, and they couldn't really wrap their head around why I wasn't more motivated to get them their diploma and get them on to college and this and that and the other thing. And I said, well, what's the point of going to college? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, just what's the point? Like, what's the end game? And they're like, well, it's to get your diploma. I'm like, well, no, it's to get a job. And then that completely just changed the tone of the conversation. And it was quite eye-opening for a lot of people to sort of say, oh, right, yeah, you do actually eventually need to work. And so it is sort of, a means to an end. And so that's the vision that we want to start to incorporate. When we're talking about education, a lot of times parents really, really, really want them to continue on into post-secondary education. They really want them to do well education-wise. Put that part of your vision statement. If you want them to go on to college or university or some sort of post-secondary education, write it down, put it in your vision. Because even if you graduate in Ontario, at least anyway, if you graduate with 0 credits, there are still college programs that you can attend. And it has nothing to do with your transcripts, has nothing to do with your diploma or your certificate or whatever. has everything to do with the fact that you're independent, you're able to navigate a college campus, you're able to take transportation, you can sit through a panel interview, you know, you have the maturity to be able to attend this, and then you can kind of go through and take a look at the criteria of each thing and then determine what do we need to put in place in order to then achieve eligibility through this criteria. And the unfortunate part is that a lot of times when we think about pathways into post-secondary education is that we look at the traditional route of college or university or apprenticeships or whatever the case may be. But we don't really sort of take a look at what all of those opportunities are that don't necessarily follow that linear path. It's something that there are different avenues and different ways to get into these programs or other programs that would then create a skill set to be able to then get a job in the desired industry. So it's really just having that conversation, because if you have it early on enough, then you can start to chart out what that pathway is, especially if it's really important to you. Transportation, you can have the world's best transition plan, you can have the world's best vision statement, but if you can't actually physically get there, it's a bit of a problem. So I always find that transportation is a really good thing to start to talk about. How are they going to get there? And so a lot of times parents, like, the thought of their child taking public transportation keeps them up at night. And so we kind of have to say, okay, well, let's take a look at other options. You know, how else can they get around? You know, there is transportation available through the region of Peel where I live, that if if you need to get to a community-based program or anything like that, then it's covered through the region, and it's a small fare, about the same as a bus fare for the day, and you then are able to get to your program and back. It's door-to-door pickup and drop off. There's a different sort of subset of skills that are required in order to be eligible for that, but you don't always have to revert to like taking the bus, like public transportation, because as an adult, I don't particularly like to take the bus. So if I didn't have to, I wouldn't. But there's other options, luckily. And so we have to sort of explore all those different things. Community engagement is huge. That's one of the other six. That's, number 4, I guess, on the list. And so community engagement is huge. It's a lot of times when we're thinking about sort of a well-rounded life as an adult, is that we engage in the community. We have different interests. I love to golf. It's unfortunately it's an expensive hobby, so I don't get to do it all that often. But I love to golf, and a lot of times I don't necessarily ask people if they want to go. I just go, and I get teamed up with 3 other people, and it's the first time I've met them, and we spend 4 hours together, and then never see each other ever again. It's fine. It works for me. It's good. I like it. So it's just, that's how I engage in the community a lot of times. And so other people might have their own interests. A lot of times, unfortunately, it's if you have a disability of some kind, whether it's intellectual, developmental, whatever, we look for those programs that are more geared towards other people with disabilities. And we sort of don't pay a lot of attention to the fact that if you live in a community, there is a community center. There are things that are available within sort of our own sort of reach, and we don't necessarily look at those things because we're always thinking, oh well, they've always been put into these programs in school that with other kids that have disabilities. So that's my now frame of thought, is that they can't do anything unless the other people involved have disabilities, and that's not necessarily the case. You want to start to take a look at a broader sense of how do I make sure that if they're in the community, how do I ensure that they become part of the community and feel safe and they're not vulnerable and those sort of things. And what does that look like to you as a family? What do you want them to be able to engage in the community and to feel part of that community? So again, having that sort of conversation around that. And then communication is another piece, right? If communication is autism being a communication disability, what does that look like? How are we able to then sort of create these goals? And a lot of times the default in the school system here, at least anyway, is that, well, we'll set them up with a device and then they'll use, program, whatever. And it'll be programmed on their iPad and then they can start to use that. And I guess like not my pushback, but my question, I guess, a lot of times is, have they ever used it outside the classroom? And the answer is typically no. And there's a reason for that, though, in many cases. In a lot of cases, it's because, oh, well, it's a school iPad, it doesn't leave the school, or we have a different program at home than they use at school, or it could be that they don't use anything at home, we just know what they want. When they're in the community, they don't use anything because they're with their brother or their sister or their respite worker or whatever. They don't need to have the device because that person just knows them so well. But it really is about sort of thinking in terms of, well, what could be generalized in the broader sense for communication? How would anybody know what it is that that person needs? The one of the biggest things that is sort of a prerequisite for all pathways and all sort of successful post education pathways is the ability to request your wants and needs, right? Getting your basic needs met. Because if you're not getting your basic needs met, or you're not getting your if nobody's paying attention to your request or they don't know what you're talking about, then that can sometimes lead to sort of malaligned communicative behaviors, right? Like that's what it sort of boils down to sometimes. That a lot of times that if someone is not getting their needs met, it becomes frustrating, and then that's when they start to have adverse reactions to that, as anyone would. It's got to be frustrating. And so that's something to think about when we talk about communication. And then uh, number 6 on the list of vision statement items is living arrangements. And it's a tough conversation to have. That's why I always sort of leave it to last. Not always, but most of the time I leave it to last because it's a really tough conversation to have with parents. Right. It's a really tough conversation to say, hey, you know how they've been sleeping in your bed for the last, 15 years? Well, what would it be like if they didn't even live with you? And then watch just the blood drain from the parent's face. And so it's really not a matter of like, living on their own or living at home as being the only options. It's just really about like, you as a parent, what would be ideal for you to be able to be a parent again and not a caregiver just at home, right? So there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of different not a lot. There's a few different options. There's a few different paths to take. A lot of them are contingent on funding and independence and all that sort of thing. But I mean, uh, if the idea was to be in a group home and I know it's a bad word in a lot of circles, but whatever. I use it because I don't really know how else to frame it. Sort of like a communal living. I don't know. A home where there's many other people that live there and work there, and you're under 24/7 supervision. So we'll call it that 24/7 supervision. There's not a lot of prerequisites other than sort of being lucky and getting on that list and getting a spot. If you move sort of further down, then you get or sort of further up, I don't know, further somewhere. You get supported independent living. And so that would look like, I have my own apartment. I can do more things on my own, but certain things I can't. But if I need help, I need someone to be here immediately. So there are caregivers that live in the or that work in the building, sorry, that if I need some help, I can call them and they can be here immediately, or they can take me out to get my groceries because I'm not really great at that. There are those sort of options. And then there's independent living where you have your own place. You don't have people that are checking in on you regularly or that you can call right away. But having a roommate would be pretty cool. Cost and sharing sports and that kind of thing. Or if I'm living independently and I just have a circle of friends, whatever. There are a lot of sort of different options when it comes to housing and having support within your living arrangements. Again, it's a tough conversation to have if you're a parent that's interested in having that conversation because it worries you or it's something that you're concerned with. Feel free to bring it up in a transition planning meeting because it's really important to disseminate what all the prerequisite skills are in order to then be successful at all of these different options for housing. And then, so as we start to take a look at, we have our vision, we know what we want to do, we know what we need to sort of accomplish. How do we create a roadmap? How do we build in milestones and checkpoints? And then how are we then going to bring out that communication protocol? I mentioned it earlier, one of the other slides around a communication protocol, but it's really just a matter of sort of saying, here's what I want, here's what it is that we're trying to achieve. How are we going to ensure that we're going to get there? And then you start to build in these milestone checkpoints. And so a really good example of that was that I was at a meeting at a school last year sometime, I guess it was. Not that it matters, but I was, it was recent enough. And so the IEP was the student was he was about 17 years old. He had 3 years of school left, I believe. And he's in high school, and his IEP, every single course within his IEP, they just took the curriculum from grade one and they popped that grade one curriculum into those courses, and then that's what they were trying to teach to. And so I just asked the question, like, okay, well, I'm just kind of curious, like, why this goal for this student, at this time and these circumstances and blah, blah, blah. And so the answer came back, well, that's what his profile suggests, and they kind of said it sort of snarky because I had mentioned about profile and zone of proximal development and like, is it in the sweet spot for learning and whatever. I said, okay, that's fair. However, they have 3 years of school left. So is the goal of the school then to teach the student to achieve now a grade two level by the time that they graduate, or is it to teach that they just get enough education out of their grade one to then do what with? And so I got a lot of confused looks, and I said, okay, well, let's plot this out. So I sort of drew it out on a map or on a graph on a whiteboard, and basically said, okay, so over 3 years you're going to be teaching all of these grade one skills, and then eventually to get them to potentially grade two. And now that they're at grade two and they're 21 years old, now what? What do we do with that? What could we possibly be doing with any of this information? And so they kind of went, oh, okay. I'm like, right. So you're not teaching them the curriculum to then graduate with a diploma. You're just teaching them that because that's about as low as you could go in the curriculum for Ontario to then teach them something that was curriculum based. And they said, well, yeah. And I said, okay, so do we think maybe we could scrap that and go to something that's a little bit more in line with what the parents want? And the parents wanted them to have a part-time job. That's it. Want them to have a part-time job, live somewhat independently, have friends, go out in the community, that kind of thing. So the academics weren't really the most important part. It was more about how do you can actually apply the academics into real life. And so that's what a lot of times gets forgotten, is that these academic skills are really great in the school environment, but they don't really, unless they are generalized in other aspects of their life, it really becomes a lost skill. And then what? And then the sometimes the school teams will be like, oh, we did our job, that was great, and then they're off and running. However, the parents are now sort of left with this sort of long-term issue of the fact that they can't apply any of the academics that they learned into any other aspect of their job. So it's really important that whatever it is that you have in that IEP or that program, you then work with the school team to sort of build a trajectory to sort of be like, okay, they're X amount of years old right now. They age out when they're 21. We have, 7 years left, 14 semesters, 28 reporting periods. How are we going to now build in those milestones over those 28 reporting periods to then make sure that we're actually on the right track or not? Because if you can do that early on enough, you don't wait years to find out that you're off track. The most you'll ever wait is 6 weeks. Right? It's better to be 6 weeks to know that you're off track than wait 6 years to find out you're off track. So that's why building that milestone and checkpoint piece along the way is extraordinarily important. Okay. So where is the accountability lie? When we're building individualized programs for students, we have a full understanding of their profile. We have a transition planning team. We've built a vision statement. We have all of these things in place. We now know what it is that we're going to sort of chart out, but what are our key indicators of success? Right? How do we know if we're actually creating a successful pathway for the student or not? So again, it really just boils down to that eligibility criteria for those post education pathways. So employment would have its own sort of set of criteria. Community engagement would have its own set of criteria. The workplace, post-secondary, whatever, they all have their sort of own prerequisite skills that are required in order to then be eligible for it. And so that's where I would start to take a look at saying, okay, well, those are the key indicators of success. And so to say for a student, for example, that it's their biggest concern with accessing anything outside of the home and school is their regulation. They are not able to regulate unless they have somebody there that can co-regulate with them. Okay, well, that's fine. So then we chalk that up to being one of our key indicators of success. We're going to say, okay, the KPI for this student for this, for the foreseeable future is going to be that, is going to be that they can then regulate on their own. They can self-regulate. They don't have to have a co-regulation strategy. Brilliant. Now you then sort of break that down into all the different steps that are required in order to then do that. And then that's how you build your IEP. That's how you build your individualized program. And then you start to say, okay, well, how are we going to then hold ourselves accountable to then do that? The world's worst kept secret is that there is no tracking for students when they leave educated or sorry, publicly funded education, if unless you're going to university or college, there is no track. They have no idea. There is no tracking when it comes to students going into employment, and there's no tracking when it comes to students that are going into the community. So therefore, how do we actually know if the program worked? How do we actually know if the student's successful? As parents and as caregivers, we kind of have to start to set our own criteria. And so part of that is sort of say, okay, well, who ultimately is accountable for this, and how do we make sure that we hold accountability? And so what some of the best practices that I've seen is that if we really do truly build a collaborative team where everyone understands what their role and responsibility is, we really sort of build in accountability within the group. Because we have those milestones and checkpoints along the way. We know that it was so-and-so's responsibility to make that referral for the occupational therapist to talk about sensory needs. There you go. There's that micro accountability built in. The macro accountability, a lot of times in Ontario, at least anyway, is the person who signs off on the IEP, and that's typically the principal. So the principal has put their signature on the IEP. They've said, yep, this is approved. I haven't sent anything back, nothing to change. This is great. They've signed off on it. They've said, yep, everything in the IEP is great. The transition plan, solid, everything's good. There you go. So the macro is the responsibility of that principal. So what I always try to say is to parents is include the principal. Make sure that you bring the principal on board into this team. Like, I know that they can't attend every meeting because they're busy and whatever, but at the end of the day is that the principal should probably know what they signed off on. So I think that when it comes down to that is that it's really important to make sure that they're kept apprised of what's in the IEP, sharing those micro goals, sharing those micro responsibilities, making sure that those micro accountability pieces are sort of shared broadly with the macro, which is the principal, so that way they can sort of say, well, hold on a second, I didn't realize that that's what we were doing. I need to sort of take another look at this because, I don't feel that we're there yet. Or like, yeah, I'm stoked. That's great. I'm on board 100%. I'll make sure it happens. You need support. I'm there to support you. I can push the referrals through. I can make sure the people that need to know about it are going to hear about it and make sure that we put these things in place. So it's building allyship amongst the people that can actually get things done for you. And so that's where we really start to put our emphasis, and it's by really the determining how to build in that micro accountability. And then everyone starts to really buy in because they realize that their hard work is recognized. I mean, as human beings, we typically tend to want to make sure that I'm being recognized for the work I'm doing. It's kind of nice to recognize teachers when they do a good job, and the clinicians that are involved, that they did a good job, or the parent, hey, listen, like, we asked you to take video of them doing X, Y, and Z. You did it, you sent it in. Amazing. Like, that's great. Like, we can build on that, right? Like, everyone wants to get a pat on the back every once in a while and be like, hey, you did a good job. So it's helpful to really build that collaborative, safe environment in order to then make sure that people know that if they're bringing something good to the table, that it's recognized. And if you're not bringing anything good to the table, you also make it harder for that person to hide. And so you don't want to make it easy for people to hide when they're not doing what it is that they need to be doing to support the child, because that's the most important thing. And that's how I'm going to wrap this up, is to say, you really need to make sure that we focus on the fact that this is about a child. This is about a child who is going through a very convoluted, complex system that was never designed for them. And they are now having to go through this stressful, scary, but sometimes amazing experience in order to then move on to the next stage of their life, and will hopefully be a much longer part of their life than when they were in school. School should be sort of like a blip on the radar of their life, but it needs to set them up for success long term. And I think a lot of times that when we go through these processes is that we forget that we're talking about a child. And so that child needs to be front and center. It needs to be about them, not about the program. It needs to be about them, not the teacher. It needs to be about them, not the parent. It needs to be about them and them alone. They need to be at the center of these plans. They need to have a voice. They need to have a choice. And we need to provide them with a platform in order to then share that. And if they can't do that verbally or through any other expressive, way of doing it, then the parents need to then be the ones to share that voice and that choice. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be their responsibility to carry with them forward as they leave the school system and no one else's. So remember, we're talking about a child. So anyway, that's how I'm gonna wrap up this portion of it, and we'll jump into the question and answers. And I hope that you found that helpful. I thank you again for letting me share my experience with you and to hopefully inspire some of you to hold more accountability and more to raise that bar a lot more. Don't just shoot for the bare minimum, shoot for the highest level of success that you can have.
Thank you very much, Ryan. That was very granular. Thank you. It was insightful. And I got lots of questions already.
Awesome.
People have sent in their questions. I'm sure you heard us talk about that just when you joined us this afternoon. So I'm going to start with those questions. But for those of us who are here already, you would also get a chance to answer your questions. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to start with your questions. So if you do have questions, you can type them up in the chat box now, and we'll be happy to start with your questions. Thanks once again, Ryan. And if we don't have questions, I will go over to the long list of questions that people already sent in. So if you have questions and you're here now, your time starts now. 5 seconds. 5.
4.
4. 3. 2. 1. Going on. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start with the questions that I have here. And my first question here is, where can parents access information on what their kids are entitled to? So is it like a resource bank or something?
Yeah, so well, it depends on what you sort of have to nail down what your ask is, right? Like when we say entitled to, like, what does that mean, right? So I think that would be something that we'd want to sort of nail down a little bit in further detail. But at the same time, is that, like, I think the things that parents need to realize is that school boards are forward facing, right? Or they should be. And so that information is they're publicly funded education system, right? So here, at least anyway. And so that information is public. So there should be parts on the school board's website. They typically would have sort of like a special education policy and procedure. There's the ministry puts out policy and procedure memorandums in order to say what you're eligible for. And then if there's something that you feel that they should be able to access that they're not able to access that you feel that they should be, then it's a conversation to then have with the school administration as well. So it depends on what you're looking for. There's a ton of resources. There's a ton of funding, not ton of funding. Like, it sounds like there's like this endless pot of funding. There's not, but I mean, there is a fair amount of dollars out there to buy things that would help the student. So the biggest thing is just making sure that it's not just sort of this vague sort of device that they put in that may not be customized to the individual. You want to just make sure that it's customized to the student. But as far as finding a list of all the things that they're eligible for, you're going to want to narrow that down to sort of say, well, for a communication device or for sensory needs or for an EA or things like that, parents typically tend to gravitate more towards like educational assistance, like that one-on-one. And a lot of times it's because of the therapies that they went through for autism earlier on, where they found a lot of success with one-to-one, and then they want to replicate that in school. So like, are they eligible for a one-to-one EA and those type of things? It's a pretty complicated conversation when it comes to that, because my big saying for any type of accommodation that's put in place for students in school is that unless you can find a way to fade that support, you have to then find a way to fund it. And that then becomes complicated because if you can't fade an educational assistant in that one-to-one, you then have to eventually find a way to fund a one-to-one person when they're an adult. And that's not feasible. So, well, for most families, at least anyway.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ryan. So there's a second question that says, are you able to represent people on IEP meetings? And if so, can you do that in Saskatchewan?
Yes and yes. Um, yeah, I represent people individually all the time. I work with families all the time that are working that need some support. I've supported families mostly in Ontario, but there's I mean anything is possible with remote with Zoom these days and Teams and whatever it is that people are using. So it's I can attend. I typically will attend to sort of hear how things are going and what's happening, and I work out an individual plan with the parents. Sometimes it's something that's pretty straightforward that the school team just can't wrap their head around, and other times it's very, very complicated. The vast majority of the work that I do now around educational advocacy is the exclusions and suspensions. So a lot of times when people are excluded or suspended from school, then that's usually when I get those referrals, and that's something that I work quite a fair amount on right now. So that's the bulk of the work I do. But long answer, short, or short answer, long. Yes, I can, and yes, I do.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have two similar questions, and I'm going to just kind of find a way to lump them together. First one is, what can I do when my son's school have been drumming in my ears that his support will be reduced to 50%? Or my son's executive functioning is much better, but he needs significant help in the classroom. And the next similar ones is, what steps can I take if the school suggests reducing my child's EA support due to funding or resource limitations? So I see a bit of connection
Yeah.
between both questions, and we
Yeah,
can
it's
just
yeah, thanks. And they are very similar, and they are it is a common theme. I mean, in Ontario, again, I know we have people sort of logging in and watching from all over the place, but in Ontario, there's a fairly significant shortage of personnel, trained personnel, at least anyway. And I have a very unpopular opinion in that if we really took a look at the programming and profile of the students, we probably realize that we have, just enough, or if not too many staff. And it's because of the fact that I think that when we really do boil down the student's profile and the programming, is that if the student's profile and their program were aligned, we wouldn't need to have that third party intervention with an adult in the room. And so unfortunately, we increase a lot of vulnerability when we install that adult, that human resource, and then we also sort of take away a lot of other pieces to that student's independence if we continue to put in that adult body. But that being said, it's important for a lot of parents, and it's important for a lot of students, because that's how they're able to get the information that they need to be successful in the classroom. So what I would say is that it's a much broader conversation to have with the school team or the administrators, to then say, okay, when we look at the amount of time spent in the classroom for instruction, and we take a look at the amount of the reasons why we'd need to put that person in place, why do we need to have that? And then how do we then build a fading strategy in order to then make sure that we're not actually sort of relying on that person forever? And so I think that when it comes down to having those conversations around making sure that we don't lose that support, we really need to make sure that we have a firm understanding of what that support is actually supplying. And so if it's just for a co-regulation so that the student will stay on task and doesn't get dysregulated and sort of leave the classroom or leave what it is they need to do, fine. But if it's to sort of continually provide prompts in order to then continue the work that needs to be done, get back to task, get back to your work, whatever the case may be, is that there's something there that could potentially be worked on that doesn't involve an adult sitting next to them doing that the whole time, poking them to get back to work. Because it could be an executive functioning issue, it could be a biological issue, it could be a whole whack of reasons why that person's not able to stay on task, that I would much rather spend time trying to figure out than just putting in the EA. in order to then sort of circumvent that challenge that student has in the classroom. That's what we need to figure out. So to me, it's that if we feel that we have to put in that human resource, that adult in the room to get them on task, that should be the focal point of we need to figure this out before we do anything else. And just putting in a full-time EA is not going to solve that. It's actually going to create more problems down the road. And I'm not saying we should just take it away. I'm saying it should be a conversation to have.
So thank you very much. Thank you. We have another question here that says, how can I advocate for more inclusion opportunities for my child while ensuring they still get the necessary support in specialized areas?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, inclusion is something that needs to be structured. It's something that needs to be it needs to be a win-win situation, right? Like I find a lot of times is that they'll drop a student into an environment, or they'll drop other students into an environment and expect that there's just going to be automatic inclusion, and that doesn't necessarily always happen, right? I call it the illusion of inclusion, right? And so it's not always about just sort of making sure if you think about it this way, a lot of times when students are in school, they kind of break off into their own sort of cliques and sort of groups and whatever, and so that doesn't just sort of happen naturally for a lot of teenagers. So why would we expect it to happen to students with disabilities as well, or students that are in special education? It doesn't just happen like naturally. It's something sometimes that we have to sort of pair them up with other students that have similar interests, or that that we would want to make sure that if there's a club that they're able to join, and that not being neurotypical is not going to hinder them from gaining access to it. I think that we really want to make sure that if inclusion or integration into the broader school is important to you as a parent, push for that. Push for it. There's no reason why that student wouldn't be able to have a seat at the table, or to be above the line in a gym class or any other class that they want to be a part of, in order to then access the social benefits of being with other kids their age as well. Because you want to really start to have the conversation around, if it's a congregated program that they're in, and I want them to have more exposure to other students, that's when you need to start to take a look at, well, what is your real ask? Is your ask because I feel that it would be good for their social skill development in order to then know what it's like to work with other students? Or is it because you really just want them to, at the end of the day, have a friend? And that's when it's hard to listen to sometimes when you're meeting with parents. I meet with parents a lot of the times when their kids are 20, 21 years old, and they're aging out of the school system, and the parent just looks completely deflated, and they just look at me from across the table and they say, you know what? I went through all this fight. I fought and I fought and I fought. And then at the end of the day, what I realized was that I really just wanted my kid to have a friend. And there you go. There's your why. Go to the administration and say, I want my kid to have a friend. How do we make this happen? How do we give them a chance to make friends in the school? How do we do that? And then you can then work together to try to figure out, well, is it by enrolling in a class? Is it by being a part of this club that's available? Is it by, whatever? One of the terms that I absolutely despise is reverse integration. I hear it all the time. Oh, we're bringing neurotypical kids into the classroom with students with diverse learning needs, and that's how we're going to build inclusion. I'm like, no, integration is integration. It doesn't matter. There's no such thing as reverse integration. You're integrating people into different environments. There is no such thing as reverse integration. So there's ways that sort of sometimes schools will sort of use different terminology in order to then get away from the fact that they don't have these things that are naturally set up to involve all students. And that's not right. We have to change that. But parents have to then advocate their why they want to make sure that inclusion and integration happens. You have to really narrow down your advocacy when it comes to that.
Thank you so much. It was very insightful. Another one says, how can I ensure that my child's IEP reflects all of their needs, both academic and functional?
It's a big question.
I feel like that deserves a whole session with
That's,
you.
yeah, I mean, I don't know, rewind this, rewind the tape on this and watch it, I guess. It's, yeah, I hopefully I answered a lot of those pieces, but I mean, I think it's just really a matter of making sure that you know what you want your end game to be, making sure that you're able to really whole as a whole meet with the school team to then talk about why this goal for this student in this environment at this time under these circumstances. And as you start to flush those things out and ask a lot of questions, then if they have answers that you find acceptable, you know you're there. If they don't know how to come up with answers for it, or if they come up with answers that you think are completely out to lunch, then you know you've got a problem. And that's when you know that it's not lined up. But don't get lost in the edge of battle, right? Edu speak is a real thing. It's meant to be vague. It's meant to sort of not nail down a specific end game to it. It's not meant to nail down any sort of real yeah, I guess just sort of any sort of accountability in it. So you really just got to make sure that if it sounds like it's edu speak, it probably is. You might just want to get them to clarify. What did you mean by this particular goal? What does that actually mean? Can you explain it to me? Can you provide examples? You know what I mean? Always asking for examples is a good way to do it, because if they can't provide examples of it, then it may not exist.
Awesome, thank you. There's two more that I will put together.
Sure.
The first one is, what are my legal rights as a parent if the school board denies additional resources or services for my child's learning needs? And then the other one is, how do I challenge the school's decision if they're not implementing my child's IEP as agreed upon?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of different options. A lot of times when I meet with parents, their first go-to is, going to the director's office. I'm gonna go to the director's office. I'm gonna launch my complaint there. I'm gonna go to the human rights office. Or I'm gonna do that. And my recommendation is always you have to kind of go through the chain of command. You have to really go in a very thoughtful process, and you want to go to the teacher, have the conversation with them. Once you've done talking to the teacher about that, then you want to then go to the principal. And if you don't get a satisfactory answer from the principal, then you would go to the superintendent. Once you go to the superintendent, if you don't have an answer that you want from them, you'd want to go to the superintendent that's in charge of special education. And then from there, then you'd want to go to the special education advisory committee, which most schools, if not all in Ontario, are required to have. And then you'd want to go to the trustee and then the director's office. Like because if you go too high first, they're going to kick you back down and be like, well, did you talk to so-and-so? And if you don't say, yes, I talked to so-and-so, then they'd be like, talk to them first and then come back to me. So save time. I know that you feel that you're not getting the adequate answer from the principal or the teacher. You have to sort of follow in line, but just again, it's really just sort of making sure that how do you know that they're not getting these things implemented, or how do you know that what you're going in and asking for isn't actually being done? And it kind of comes back to my last comment about ask for examples. A lot of times those the reporting that goes on with IEPs, it's very vague. A lot of it is anecdotal. A lot of it doesn't actually sort of mean really anything. You want to just make sure that you really kind of have a strong understanding of what actually is being done. And if they say that they're doing something, then ask for examples of it. Say, well, can you provide me with a whole bunch of examples? Like that'd be really great, And if they can't, then you at least have something to go back with. But again, it's really just making sure that you really fully understand what it is that you're asking for. But if you start to see, so just as a concrete example, is that what I would say is that something that I would recommend for anyone watching this to do is to take your last 3 IEPs. Okay, so this is always a good exercise to do. Take the last 3 IEPs and grab a highlighter and, oh, sorry, individualized education plan. I just saw the question in what does IEP stand for? So grab the last 3 individualized education plans that you have, and under the goals and the academic goals for that particular course, whatever is repeated on those 3 IEPs, highlight. Okay, you never want to see the same goal twice. If you see the same goal twice, it means that goal is not within the student's zone of proximal development, which is their sweet spot for learning. It means that they can't achieve that. Highlight any repetitive goals that come up on the IEP. And then the next thing you want to highlight on those three IEPs is anytime that it says with assistance, highlight it. Anytime that it says something like 6 out of 10 times or 8 out of 10 times or 30% of the time or whatever the case may be, highlight it. Those are things that you're going to want to highlight because it shows the fact that that goal is something that is too high for that student to do. So therefore, there should be a lot of highlight repetitive goals. You got it, Laura. So it's a matter of highlighting those things because what it shows is that they're shooting for a goal that is too high. There's all of these prerequisite skills that that student does not have that is preventing them from hitting that one goal. And that's why you need to highlight it. Think of it in terms of like my coworker or colleague, Andrea always makes me laugh because she always says, you'd never want to cross the street successfully 6 out of 10 times. It's a good point. I never want to do something that could put my life in danger 6 out of 10 times. I'd want to do it 10 out of 10 times, right? So you'd want to make sure that whatever it is that is being told to do, they can do it 100% of the time. And that's what they're teaching towards. And if they can't, there are underlying skills that they can't do that's preventing them from doing that one thing 100% of the time. That's it. Right.
Mm.
So that's a good concrete goal to have, is just like go into a meeting and just sit there with them and then just highlight all the repetitive things. Why did we do this over the past, like, why is this goal on here 3 years in a row? You telling me you're actually working on that goal for the past 3 years? I doubt it. Let's talk about that, because before this gets too far, let's try to figure this out now. Right. And then you know that you're not wasting time.
Right. Oh, thank you so much. I think I've gone through all of the questions that I have here.
Yeah.
If we have additional questions, I will read them, but there's no other questions. So, okay, now they're coming in. What about when the goals are too low?
Yeah, same idea. When the goals are too low and you find that your child is capable of much more, go back. And then so you need to sort of add teacher speak to your vernacular as well, right? So I want you to familiarize yourself with the term zone of proximal development. Okay. So you'll watch their jaw, like their jaw will hit the table if you come in and ask them, well, does this align with their zone of proximal development? Because they'll be surprised that, you're coming in and asking that. It's a good thing to have. But basically it just means that, like, if this is their zone of proximal development and they're trying to teach something that's like way out here, it means that it's not hitting their sweet spot for learning. It's something that they should be able to do. Right. And so there's like emerging skills and there's all these different types of things. But you really want to just say, like, okay, I feel that this skill is too low. I know that they can do it. They do it at home. They do it in the community. You're telling me that they can't do it at school. I find that hard to believe. However, like, let's try to see, like, can you prove to me where it is that this fits within their zone of proximal development? Show me how did you come to this conclusion to provide this goal for my son or my daughter at this particular time? What kind of evidence did you come to this conclusion that this was the appropriate goal? Right. And they should be able to say, well, in this report, it says that they're at this percentile for this and this and this and this and this and this. So therefore, based on the information you provide us, we came up with this goal to sort of have the baseline so that they should be able to do this. And if they can explain it, then at least then you have a bit more of an intelligible conversation that you can then have around that goal, and you can kind of debate it, but on an even playing field. If they kind of go, I don't know, then you now have a much better argument to try to say, like, hey, well, I think it's too low. So why don't we try to say, like, let's go back and go over that information around their assessments and their profile and their summaries and the reports that you got from all these different clinicians and different teachers and all the different information that we provided you, and come up with something that I don't feel is too low that should be within their zone of proximal development. And then that's how you have a conversation. Always make it about something objective, right? I rarely, if ever, go into a meeting and ask a question I don't already know the answer to. Right? I know the answer. I know the answer is because they just made it up. I know that the answer is because they really had no idea what, that they were ever going to get called out on it. And that's okay. Like if they admit that and they're like, like we thought we were doing the right thing, but we didn't. Okay, fine. Like we can now start over again, right? And it's not through any malicious intent. It's just through the fact that they just, thought they were doing the right thing. Fine. But they should be able to explain it and they should be able to prove it. They should be able to say the reason why we came up with this goal was because of X, Y, and Z, and here's the supporting documentation, but here's where we're going to then go from here. And if they can't do those things and they can't tell you where it's going to go from there, now you've got a problem, and now you've got something that you need to bring the administration into the conversation with. Because if they're doing it at that particular time, they're doing it all across the board. So that's when you really need to start to make sure that you're aligning your conversations much more pragmatically, much more objectively, ask those questions. And if they're telling you something and you think that it's bogus, 2 words, prove it. You're a data-driven system. Show me the data. Right? And that's it.
Prove it.
Prove it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, prove it. You can say it nicer than that, obviously, but but it's true. It's just prove it. Okay, you're saying that that's the level that they're at. Okay, show me the evidence. I'd really love to see it because I'm not seeing it. So you've come up with it somehow. Let's have
Help me
it.
see
Let me
it.
see it. I'd love
Yeah.
to, and then watch them go. Ooh.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Brian. I think we've answered all of the questions for today. We really appreciate your time. And thank you for spending the last hour just sharing and being so granular in all of in the information that you have shared with us. We appreciate that. So if we have any more questions, I'm pretty sure we will push them over to you. We would also share your email address if that's okay with everyone, if they want to reach out to you for some kind of individual consultation or something.
Sure.
Absolutely. We'll share your email address as well. So thank you very much, Ryan. And thanks everyone for listening. I'm going to be launching a poll on the screen right now for us to just sort of, it would only be 2 seconds really. But yes, thank you very much, Ryan. We have officially released you today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was nice to
Thank
speak with you
you.
guys. Okay.
Thanks. So I have launched the poll.
Take care.
Yes, bye for now, Ryan. Thank you. So please just take a couple seconds to fill out the poll. We really want to hear from you. I'm so glad that we're somehow able to do this right now. Yes. So please just a couple seconds. Super informative. Happy to hear that. Please just translate that into the feedback for us here as well. Just so that we have data. We also need data. We need data. We need data. We need to know what's how you found these sessions. What else would you be interested in hearing? And yeah, just any additional comments that you'd have for us. So this would only take a few seconds. And for those who joined maybe a little later, I also shared some of the resources that we provide. I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with that, but for those who don't, you can just hop on the website, coammf.org. There's lots of information on there. We can now stop recording. Okay.